The 10 cows were digging again. Same spot, third day in a row. James Whitmore watched from the fence line, his face a mask of weary confusion. He'd inherited the 10 cattle 3 weeks ago, along with 40 acres of land nobody wanted. An uncle he barely remembered had left them to him. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it was a curse. The cows were walking skeletons. Their ribs showed through their patchy hides. Their eyes were hollow. They barely ate, barely drank. But they dug. They dug with a frantic, desperate energy that made no sense. They'd carved a perfect circle into the hard-packed earth, a hole now 3 feet deep. They worked in shifts. When one collapsed from exhaustion, another took its place. The folks in town whispered that James was just plain unlucky. Failed crops, failed marriage. Now, even his inheritance was a joke. But James saw things other people missed. The cows only dug when the sun was directly overhead. They huddled by the barn during storms, as if they were afraid of what the rain might uncover. And they dug in formation, like soldiers following silent orders. Yesterday, he tried to fence off the hole. The cows had moaned all night, pressing against the boards until their foreheads bled. He'd taken the fence down before they killed themselves. Laura Monroe, the county vet, was the only one who didn't treat him like a fool. She'd examined the animals twice. She said they showed signs of poisoning, but she couldn't find the source. Their blood was all wrong. And strangest of all, they seemed to get better after digging, as if the act of tearing up the earth was some kind of medicine. James kicked at the dirt around the hole. Something glinted in the sun. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't metal. He knelt, brushing the soil away. The fragment was smooth and dark, and it felt warm in his hand. As he lifted it to get a better look, all 10 cows stopped digging. They turned their heads and stared at him, their ears pricked forward. Before he could see what it was, the fragment crumbled into a fine gray powder between his fingers. It scattered in the wind, leaving a metallic taste in the air and a strange burning sensation on his palm. The cows immediately went back to their work, digging even more frantically than before. Whatever he had just touched, they wanted it out of the ground, and they wanted it now. By noon, Wyatt McGraw came riding into his yard. McGraw owned half the county and acted like he owned the other half too. He sat on his prize stallion, a gold watch gleaming on his vest, and looked down at James with open contempt. "Heard you inherited Jeremiah's problem animals," McGraw said, not even bothering to dismount. "Town's betting you'll have to put 'em down before the month is out." "They just need proper care," James said, his jaw tight. McGraw laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Proper care? They're destroying your land, boy." He pointed at the hole. "Sick cattle dig when they're looking for minerals. Means your soil's poison. Something in the ground is killing them slow." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. Contaminated soil. It would explain everything. The sickness, the digging, the strange fragment that had burned his hand. "You interested in selling?" McGraw asked, his voice suddenly casual. "I'll give you a fair price for the acreage. The cattle are worthless, but the land connects to my western border." The offer was too generous. This land was considered useless. McGraw was lying. "What makes my 40 acres so valuable to you?" James asked. "Water rights," McGraw said, a little too quickly. "Your creek." But the creek on this land had run dry years ago. Wyatt McGraw knew something. Something he didn't want James to know. After he left, James watched the cows. The hole was wider now, their work precise, almost intelligent. The sickest one, a Holstein with bald patches on her hide, dug deeper than the rest. When she finally stumbled back, exhausted, James saw it. Something dark was embedded in the bottom of the hole. Not another fragment. Something bigger. Something that caught the sun in a way that hurt his eyes. As he leaned in for a closer look, he heard hoofbeats. 3 riders coming at a full gallop. They weren't locals. They wore expensive gear and carried heavy saddlebags. And they were heading straight for the hole. The 3 strangers pulled up 20 yards away. The leader, a man with silver hair and cold, careful eyes, swung down from his horse. "Samuel Granger," he said, his voice smooth. "We represent certain business interests. We're here about your inheritance, specifically what your uncle might have left buried on this land." They knew. They knew before they even saw the hole. My uncle left me 10 cows and 40 acres, James said, his hand inching toward the rifle propped against the fence. Nothing more. One of the other men, younger, with nervous eyes, pointed at the hole. Your livestock tell a different story. Cattle don't dig unless they smell something. Something that draws them. What kind of something? James asked. Granger's smile was thin. Your uncle Jeremiah worked for the Territorial Mining Commission. Sometimes he found things that weren't supposed to be found. Things that certain people would pay to keep buried. The sick Holstein stumbled away from the hole, and James got a clear look. It was a rectangular object, wrapped in thick, oiled canvas. Definitely man-made. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for whatever that is, Granger said. More money than you could make in 10 years of ranching. Now it was all making sense. Wyatt McGraw wanted the land. These men wanted what was under the land. And his dying cattle were about to expose a secret that powerful men had killed to keep. I need to think about it, James said. Granger nodded, but his eyes were hard. Don't think too long. Other people know about this place, and they're not as reasonable as we are. As they rode away, James knew one thing for sure. His 10 sick cows were about to dig up a whole world of trouble. That evening, Laura Monroe rode up, her medical bag tied to her saddle. Saw Granger and his men in town, she said, her face etched with worry. They were asking about you, about your uncle. James was grateful to see her. She was the only person in the county he trusted. He pointed his shovel at the hole. They weren't wrong. Together, they cleared more dirt away from the object. It was a leather portfolio, wrapped in canvas and rope to protect it from the damp earth. Your cattle seem stronger, Laura noted, checking one of the cows. Their color is better. It's like digging this hole is healing them. The idea was crazy, but it felt true, as if the poison in the ground was being drawn out by their efforts. As they worked, James felt the burning in his palms return, stronger this time. The canvas pulled away, revealing a corner of the leather case. James, Laura said, her voice tight. Your hands. He looked down. Where his skin had touched the soil around the portfolio, dark stains were appearing, as if he'd been burned. The soil is contaminated, Laura breathed. Whatever is in this portfolio, it's been poisoning your land, your animals. Before he could answer, they heard more riders. A lot of them, coming fast. And in the growing darkness, he could see the glint of drawn rifles. It was Wyatt McGraw, and he'd brought his whole crew. He wasn't here to make another offer. He was here to take what he wanted, and to bury anyone who got in his way. Wyatt McGraw swung off his horse, his 4 ranch hands fanning out behind him, their rifles held ready. Evening, James, Wyatt said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Heard you found something that belongs to other people. The only thing I've found is that this land is poisoned, Laura shot back, standing her ground beside James. Poisoned with what? Wyatt demanded, his calm demeanor cracking. James knelt and pulled the leather portfolio from the earth. The oiled canvas crumbled away, revealing documents sealed with wax. Territorial seals. Official reports. Looks like mining commission surveys, James said, reading the top page. Signed by Jeremiah Whitmore. Wyatt's face went white. Those were supposed to be destroyed. The admission hung in the night air, heavy and damning. His uncle hadn't been a drunk. He'd been a whistleblower. He hadn't destroyed the records. He'd buried them. James untied the string. The first document was a survey of underground water sources. The second was a mineral assessment. It detailed heavy metal contamination. Right in the middle of Wyatt McGraw's main ranch. This says your western pastures have been poisoning livestock for decades, James read, his voice ringing out in the quiet night. Runoff from an old mine. The government ordered you to clean it up. That's a lie, Wyatt sputtered. There's more, James said, his voice like ice. Bills of sale for contaminated land. Records of you selling sick cattle to buyers in other counties. And receipts. Payments to territorial officials to make these reports disappear. Those are federal crimes, Laura whispered, her eyes wide with horror. The portfolio held more than just reports. It held the truth of a 20-year criminal conspiracy. A detailed map showed a contamination plume that stretched across half the county. poisoning the water for 3 different towns. Dozens of ranchers had been ruined, their families sickened, never knowing why. Wyatt's friendly mask shattered. "Those documents don't exist," he snarled, signaling his men. They raised their rifles. "Jeremiah was a drunk who made up stories, and you're a nobody who's about to have a tragic accident." But as he spoke, more lights appeared on the horizon, lanterns approaching from all sides. The confrontation had drawn an audience. It wasn't more of Wyatt's men, it was the sheriff, the territorial judge, and a dozen other ranchers whose land was marked on Jeremiah's poison map. The jig was up. Sheriff Coleman dismounted, his face grim. "Lower your weapons, Wyatt. This isn't a range war, it's a crime scene." The judge took the portfolio from James, his expression growing more severe with every page he read by the lantern light. "These reports show contamination levels that should have triggered a federal intervention," one of the ranchers said, his voice shaking with rage. "Because someone was paid to lose them," the judge said, holding up a receipt. "Territorial Supervisor Marcus Webb, $5,000. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Webb had retired a rich man, his wealth a mystery until now. Laura, who had been studying the veterinary records, looked up. "According to these manifests," she said, her voice trembling, "over 2,000 head of contaminated cattle were sold to buyers in Kansas, in Colorado. It wasn't just a local problem anymore. It was a plague that had been deliberately spread across the territories." Ranchers stepped forward, seeing their own property lines on the contamination map, realizing their years of bad luck had been a deliberate, calculated crime. "My wife," one man whispered, his face pale. "She died of a sickness the doctor could never name." Wyatt McGraw looked around at the faces of the men he had betrayed, at the empire he had built on their suffering, and he saw it all crumbling to dust. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward and put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not going anywhere, Wyatt. You've got a lot of explaining to do." As dawn broke over the small ranch, James Whitmore, the town's unluckiest man, realized his inheritance wasn't 10 sick cows. It was justice. 3 weeks later, James stood in the courthouse and watched federal marshals lead Wyatt McGraw to a prison wagon. The once powerful rancher was a broken man, his vast empire seized by the government. The portfolio his uncle had buried had blown the lid off a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just Wyatt and a corrupt supervisor. It was county commissioners, bank presidents, federal inspectors. A web of greed and poison that had spread for 20 years. The human cost was still being counted. Dozens of unexplained deaths over the years were now being re-examined, linked to the contaminated beef that had been sold across the frontier. Families who had blamed themselves for their misfortunes now had a name for their enemy. James Whitmore, once an object of pity, was now a hero. His willingness to stand up to Wyatt, to refuse the bribes offered by Granger's men, had made him a legend. The federal government bought his 40 acres at a premium, turning it into a research station. The money, along with the reward for exposing the conspiracy, made James one of the wealthiest men in the county. 6 months after the discovery, his 10 cows, now healthy and strong, grazed on clean pasture. He had been appointed to the new Environmental Protection Board, ensuring a scandal like this could never happen again. Laura Monroe had said yes. They were to be married the next day. Standing in the evening light, James looked at the spot where his cows had first started digging. The hole was gone, replaced by a small stone monument commemorating the victims of Wyatt McGraw's greed. His uncle hadn't left him a curse. He'd left him a chance to unearth a terrible truth, and in doing so, to find his own redemption. What do you think drives a man like Wyatt McGraw to poison his own community for profit? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of how 10 sick cows brought down a criminal empire, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier. And don't forget to subscribe to help us keep bringing you stories where the truth refuses to stay buried. Your support means the world to us.